Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. The federal courtroom felt less like a chamber of justice and more like a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding. Every detail was magnified. The muted gold of the wood paneling, the stern gaze of the bailiffs, the grim set of the prosecutor's jaws. For weeks, this room had been a crucible, melting down careers, reputations, and legacies under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. This was the Diddy trial, a name that had become synonymous with whispered excess and alleged depravity. The air hung thick, heavy with the weight of expectation. Eyes, weary yet transfixed, were fixed on the double doors at the back, waiting for the next witness, a name whispered on the lips of reporters and lawyers alike. A name the defense surely hoped would finally shift the narrative, or at least offer a moment of predictable calm. Prior witnesses had been varied: former associates, employees, a few lesser-known figures from the music industry. Their testimonies had painted a disturbing picture, but none had yet truly detonated the core of Diddy's seemingly impenetrable empire. The public, ravenous for concrete evidence against a man who had long operated above reproach, felt a growing frustration. Was this all there was? More allegations, more vague connections. Then came the sound that would forever etch itself into the memory of every soul present, the slow, deliberate creak of those heavy oak doors. A collective gasp ripped through the silence, sharp and visceral. Even the judge, usually a figure of granite composure, leaned forward almost imperceptibly, a flicker of raw surprise in his eyes. There was no announcement from the court clerk, no deferential ushering, no entourage of publicists and lawyers, no pre-written statement to be dutifully handed to the press. Just a solitary figure stepping into the room, on his own terms, silhouetted for a moment against the brighter hallway light. It was Will Smith. For months, his name had swirled through the darkest corners of headlines and court leaks, not as a defendant or a witness, but as a silent, implicated specter. Whispers of unverified audio recordings, said to be too disturbing to release to the public, had clung to him like a suffocating shroud. He had remained resolutely silent, a public enigma, a celebrity-turned hermit. He had brushed off questions, deflected rumors, and retreated from the spotlight that had once defined his very existence. But something, clearly, had shattered that silence. Something had finally broken through the carefully constructed facade of composure. Perhaps it was the relentless, venomous hum of the rumors that had festered in the public consciousness, threatening to define him. Perhaps it was the bitter sting of betrayal, the realization that people he once called friends, people he had trusted implicitly, had been complicit in his torment. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the chilling echo of that tape, played behind closed doors, a fragmented memory suddenly made horrifyingly real, that finally broke through his defenses. Whatever the catalyst, Will Smith was done hiding. He wasn't walking to the witness stand as a celebrity, a titan of Hollywood, a cultural icon. He was walking as a man haunted, a man who had seen too much, experienced too much, and said far too little. And the courtroom, rigid with a sudden, electrifying anticipation, was about to be rocked to its core. Because what Will Smith was about to reveal about Diddy, the debauched parties, the insidious, systematic manipulation, the deep-seated, industry-wide fear he commanded, wasn't merely explosive. It was a terrifying, undeniable warning, a crack in the gilded veneer of an entire industry. The day had truly begun, like any other in the Diddy trial, a predictable procession of legal maneuvers and carefully vetted testimonies, the low hum of conversations among reporters, the rhythmic, almost hypnotic click of cameras from the designated press rows, lawyers huddled in hushed, strategic whispers as they waited for the next scheduled witness. But when the heavy side doors of the courtroom swung open, revealing Will Smith, utterly, defiantly alone, no security detail, no phalanx of lawyers, no publicist poised to make an announcement, the room didn't just go quiet. It went still. It held its breath. You could literally hear a pin drop, the silence so profound it was almost deafening. You could feel the shift, a palpable charge in the very air, as if the molecules themselves had rearranged in disbelief. Some reporters, initially, thought it was a mistake, a misdirection, perhaps even a publicity stunt orchestrated by a desperate defense. But the way Will moved, slow, deliberate, each step a declaration, eradicated any such notion. The familiar affable Fresh Prince stoicism, a mask he had worn for decades, had melted away, replaced by something far more raw, a grim resolve that spoke of deep, unyielding pain. This was no performance. This was real. The judge's usually impassive face registered a clear surprise, his eyebrow arching in a silent question that hung in the air. Diddy, who had been smugly lounging with an air of casual indifference at the defense table, suddenly looked like a man staring down a ghost from a past he thought long buried. His posture straightened, his eyes fixed on Will, a flicker of something akin to fear passing through them. Will walked directly to the witness stand. His gaze was fixed forward, unwavering, a man on a singular mission. He didn't spare a glance for Diddy. He didn't acknowledge the gaping jaws of the press. He simply moved, with the quiet power of a man utterly consumed by his purpose. He reached the stand, turned and sat, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. He took a deep, steadying breath, and then, his voice cutting through the profound silence, he spoke. "I wasn't asked to come here today. I asked if I could speak." The judge, after a brief, almost imperceptible nod to the prosecution and defense, allowed it. The gavel remained untouched, the silence unbroken by any procedural objection. And from that very moment, the entire trial pivoted on a single shocking axis. Because what Will Smith was about to articulate wasn't a rehearsed media narrative. It wasn't a leaked social media snippet, nor a scandalous tabloid headline. It was something far deeper, something that had festered within him for years, poisoning his very soul. Something that began at a party no one was ever supposed to talk about, a night buried under layers of celebrity glitz and carefully constructed oblivion. And now, that buried past was about to violently erupt. I've kept a lot inside for a very long time. For decades, I've laughed on red carpets. I've held up awards, glittering symbols of supposed achievement. I've made movies about honor, about strength, about fighting for what's right. But none of that can hide what I saw, what I experienced, and who made it happen. It doesn't wash away the stain. "You did." Will Smith, his gaze unwavering, proceeded to tell the courtroom that it all started, as many Hollywood nightmares inevitably do, with a simple invitation. It came through a mutual contact, someone he had worked with extensively before, someone he implicitly trusted. The way they framed it, it was supposed to be a low-key, intimate celebration, Diddy's birthday. Nothing wild, they assured him, just good music, high-level networking, a place where stars could unwind, let their guard down, and connect without the usual intrusive glare of the public eye. He'd been to such exclusive events before, countless times, so he didn't question it. He accepted the invitation, a small, innocent decision that would unravel years of his life. But the moment Will arrived, a strange, unsettling chill settled over him. It wasn't just the sheer scale of it. A sprawling, opulent mansion, nestled deep in the hills, its facade intimidating even in the warm California night. It was the atmosphere. Black SUVs formed a silent, impenetrable fortress at the front gate, their tinted windows reflecting nothing. Security guards, like silent, predatory sentinels, were everywhere, their earpieces glinting in the dim light. The second I stepped inside, my phone was taken, just gone. Handed over, no questions asked, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. That should have been the first red flag, burning bright in the darkness. They said it was for privacy, to protect the guests. But it felt like something else entirely. It felt like they didn't want anything getting out. Like they were sealing us in. He was ushered inside, the heavy doors closing behind him with a soft thud that echoed like a finality. The space was cloaked in dim-colored lights, creating long dancing shadows that seemed to shift with a life of their own. The music wasn't celebratory. It was low, strange, ambient, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, a bass line that vibrated through the floor and up into his bones. There were no visible cameras, not the kind you'd expect at a celebrity party. Yet mirrors glinted from every angle, some strategically placed, some stretching from floor to ceiling, creating endless reflections. It felt, profoundly, as if unseen eyes were always watching, always recording, always assessing. After a few forced drinks, the contents of which now felt suspiciously potent and stilted, superficial conversations with people who seemed both too eager and too guarded, Diddy himself approached him. His arrival felt less like a host greeting a guest, and more like a predator singling out its prey. He came right up to me, put a hand on my shoulder, too familiar, too heavy. He said something like, "Now you're part of the family." And he smiled, that smile. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't genuine hospitality, it was something else. It was ownership. Pure, unadulterated ownership. Will, still trying to make sense of the increasingly unsettling atmosphere, still clinging to the notion that this was just another eccentric celebrity party, followed Diddy into a dimly lit back room. He expected a private business discussion, perhaps a pitch for a new project, a strategic alliance. Instead, what he saw inside that room froze him, deep to his very core. The blood drained from his face as he stared, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. There were people performing, men, women. Some I recognized instantly, from film and music, their faces distorted by the dim light, and something else, something I couldn't yet name. Some looked impossibly young, too young, and others were standing by, watching, their faces blank or amused, like it was nothing more than high-stakes entertainment. And Diddy? He was there, at the center of it all. He was laughing, like it was the most normal, most natural thing in the world, like this was his personal circus, and we were all just players in his twisted game. I didn't know how to leave. My mind raced, searching for an exit, a reason, an excuse, but there was none. And that, I realized, was the point. Once you're in, you're in. Trapped. Days after that chilling, hallucinatory night, the first tangible sign of the trap arrived. A call came. The number was blocked, anonymous. A disembodied voice, cold, amused, almost purring, simply stated, "Hope you had fun, Fresh Prince." Then the line went dead, leaving Will alone with the creeping dread. He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as a bizarre, unsettling prank. He tried to tell himself he'd simply had too much to drink, that his memory was playing tricks on him. Until, less than a week later, an unmarked, heavy envelope arrived at his personal office, hand-delivered by a silent courier. Inside, a small, unassuming flash drive. I almost didn't look. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it away, to burn it, to pretend it didn't exist. But I did. I plugged it in. It was footage. Horrifying, undeniable footage from that very night. Will, on a plush couch, clearly disoriented, his movements slow, his eyes unfocused. He saw himself laughing at something, but the memory of what it was, or even why he was laughing, was completely gone. And then, from behind the camera, Diddy's voice, chillingly clear, calm, and utterly devoid of remorse. He said, "That's how we keep him." Just like that, casual, clinical, like I was a specimen in a lab. The fear Will described feeling in that moment was visceral, paralyzing. It was unlike anything his celebrated life, shielded by fame and fortune, had ever prepared him for. It was the terror of profound vulnerability, of being utterly exposed and powerless. I realized I wasn't invited to that party. I was initiated, inducted into something I never signed up for. That, he stated, was when the manipulation truly began. The phone calls, the subtle shifts, the insidious erosion of his career. Invitations to more parties, more exclusive gatherings, would follow. He would decline, politely at first, then firmly, then with a growing sense of panic. And then subtly, insidiously, his life would begin to shift. Movie roles he was deep in talks for, projects that were all but confirmed, vanished into thin air. Collaborators he'd worked with for years, friends he thought he could count on, stopped returning his calls. Whispers started online, appearing on obscure blogs, then rapidly spreading through mainstream media. Rumors of instability, of infidelity, of a hidden, scandalous life. I knew what it was. It wasn't coincidence, it was pressure. Diddy didn't need to say it. He didn't need to make direct threats. He just made it abundantly clear, through the crushing weight of his influence, that silence was the cost of my peace. Silence was the currency of my continued existence in Hollywood. For years, Will said nothing. He smiled through interviews, plastered on that familiar, reassuring grin. He brushed off the venomous rumors as the cost of fame, as baseless gossip. He poured himself, obsessively, into his work, hoping that success and distraction would somehow erase the memories, would somehow protect him. But every time a news story broke, Cassie's harrowing allegations, Dawn Richards' chilling claims, even Meek Mill's name dragged into the mire of this unfolding scandal, a question gnawed at him, a relentless burning ember in his gut. If they're speaking, if they're risking everything, why am I still quiet? Why am I still holding on to this secret that's eating me alive? Diddy didn't just ruin people's careers. He didn't just extract their talent. He instilled in them a paralyzing, soul-crushing fear of telling the truth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, of the jury, is what finally brought me to this court. Not for my career, not for my reputation, but for the truth itself. It wasn't just a video. That was simply the first thread. That was the leash, the visible one. But beneath it, a far more intricate network was already in place. From that moment on, he felt as if every aspect of his life, every decision, every opportunity, had invisible strings attached. Calls would come through his agent, invitations to exclusive events, meetings for lucrative projects, collaborations linked, however subtly, to Diddy's sphere of influence. When he refused these overtures, the unseen machinery would churn, slow and deliberate at first, then with alarming speed. I'd say no to a Diddy event, a birthday bash, a networking session, and the very next week, a greenlit project, a major film, a record deal I was on the cusp of signing. It would suddenly be not greenlit anymore. There would be a creative difference, a scheduling conflict, a change in direction. Always a plausible excuse, never a direct threat. This wasn't a coincidence, not once or twice. It became a chillingly consistent pattern, a cruel form of Pavlovian conditioning. Diddy didn't need to issue direct threats. He had cultivated a sprawling, self-operating system that did it for him. A network of loyalists and compromised individuals, PR people who could spin any narrative, bloggers who could conjure scandals from thin air, producers who controlled access to studios, anonymous sources ready to leak damaging, often fabricated, information. He knew exactly who to call to conjure problems out of thin air, or to make lucrative opportunities vanish in a puff of smoke. Will recounted a specific, devastating instance in 2013. He had been lined up for a major international campaign with a top luxury brand, a career-defining endorsement. Final negotiations were underway, the first lookbook already shot, glossy proofs sitting on his desk. Then out of nowhere, they dropped me. Just like that. No reason given. Silence. 2 weeks later, another Diddy event invite landed on my desk. I declined again, of course. And then the phone calls started. Not from him, from people I knew. Rumored gossip blogs, suddenly posting stories about me that were oddly specific. Fabricated nonsense, but woven with details only someone with intimate access to my private life could have planted. It was psychological warfare, meticulously orchestrated. You began to doubt your own sanity, to question your own paranoia. Was it him? Was it just bad luck? Was I truly losing it? But then you saw it, the unmistakable patterns, the swift, disproportionate punishments. You realized you weren't imagining it. You were being systematically boxed in, controlled, his influence tightening like a slow, constricting python. I knew other celebrities going through similar things. I saw the signs. I heard the hushed conversations. Some are sitting silent right now, trapped in their own gilded cages. Some have ironclad contracts that won't let them speak, gag orders that protect the powerful. Some are simply scared they'll be exposed the same way I was, scared their careers will be annihilated. You didn't just collect people. You controlled them. You enslaved them with fear and compromise. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Every single person present knew precisely what he meant. Will didn't stop at personal manipulation. He meticulously explained how Diddy's grip wasn't confined to individual artists or their personal lives. It stretched, insidious and omnipresent, into the very foundation of Hollywood itself. You couldn't walk onto a major stage, greenlight a project, or sign a significant deal without brushing shoulders with someone he'd helped put there, someone who owed him, someone he had dirt on. He described a high-profile charity gala in 2016, a glittering affair where behind the scenes, high-powered figures from music, film, politics, and tech all paid a disturbing deference to Diddy. I watched one executive from a major streaming platform, a man who commanded billions, hand him a plain USB drive and whisper, "Only you have the final cut." It was sickening. They treated him like the true power broker, the ultimate gatekeeper. Will didn't elaborate on the specific contents of that drive, but the implication hung heavy, thick with menace. It confirmed his deepest, darkest fear. Diddy wasn't merely networking, he was gatekeeping. He was controlling the flow of power, of information, of careers. He described countless moments where he witnessed other actors, rappers, public figures behave with an unsettling, almost desperate submissiveness around Diddy, laughing too hard at his bland jokes, deferring to him in every conversation, their eyes holding a secret fear. I realized a lot of these people weren't his friends. They were his survivors, playing a part to survive another day, to avoid the wrath that awaited those who dared to defy him. Will testified that he stayed silent for so long, years stretching into decades, fearing he'd be permanently blackballed, that his career, his very identity, would be erased. But then I realized I'd already been blackballed, quietly, insidiously. There was no official blacklist, no public decree, just whispers, unspoken doubt, and doors quietly closing in my face. The calls stopped, the opportunities dried up, and I was left wondering if I was just imagining it, if it was my own fault. The only reason he stayed relevant at all, he claimed, the only reason he didn't disappear entirely, was because his audience, the public, wouldn't let him. Their loyalty, their connection to the Fresh Prince persona, was the one thing Puff didn't control. Over time, he began to see things differently. He started revisiting old footage, photos from past events, after-parties, press junkets. He realized how often Diddy's influence loomed behind the scenes, a constant, unseen presence. If not in person, then in power, always manipulating, always controlling. And then, Will said, came the moment that changed everything. The moment the past, carefully buried, clawed its way back to the surface. I stayed quiet for 20 years, 2 decades. I convinced myself it wasn't happening, or that it wasn't happening to me. I compartmentalized, I buried it deep. But then, the audio started to surface. The whispers of the tapes became concrete. The first time he heard about secret audio tapes being played in court, tapes that allegedly contained chilling evidence against Diddy, he didn't believe it. He dismissed it as more tabloid fodder, more sensationalism, until the call came. Not from the prosecution, not from a pushy journalist, but from someone he used to trust implicitly, a former confidant, their voice trembling with a mixture of fear and sympathy. They said, "Will, you're on one of those tapes, the ones being played in court. They played it yesterday. People are talking. It's bad, Will. Really bad." He described the sensation of the floor dropping out from under him, as if the very ground beneath his feet had vanished. The room spun. He felt a sudden dizzying wave of nausea. He didn't even know a tape like that existed, let alone that he was on it. But once he forced himself to accept the terrifying possibility that it might be real, that this phantom horror might have been captured, everything else started to connect. The fragmented memories, the blackouts, the envelope, the blocked numbers, the chilling feeling of being watched. It was all a meticulously crafted system, and he, Will Smith, the Fresh Prince, the A-lister, was just one more victim in its intricate web. The breaking point, he confessed, wasn't simple fear. It was humiliation, a profound, soul-stripping humiliation that cut deeper than any lost role or public scandal. I realized that if I didn't speak now, if I allowed this to remain hidden, my silence would become my legacy. My entire life, my career, my family, would be defined by this unspoken shame. And I couldn't live with that. My kids are going to see these headlines. My grandkids might see them. I had to speak, for them, for me, for the truth. He called the prosecution team himself, cutting through layers of bureaucracy and celebrity handlers. I told them, I'm ready. Whatever you need, whatever questions you have, whatever nightmares I have to relive, I'll answer them, all of them. I wasn't just coerced. I was played. I was filmed. I was used. And you, Diddy, you knew exactly what you were doing. You knew what you were capturing. You knew what you held over me. When the prosecution, with due caution, asked if he wanted to hear the audio, Will hesitated. Every fiber of his being screamed no, but he knew he had to. He couldn't testify to its existence without confronting it. It was played behind closed doors, no press, no jury, no curious observers. Just the judge, the lawyers, and Will Smith, alone in a sterile room with his deepest fear. I heard myself laughing. It was hollow. It wasn't real laughter. It sounded drunk. No, worse, it sounded drugged. My voice was slurred, distant, like it wasn't truly mine. He described the background of the audio, the slow, unsettling music, barely audible, like a siren from a distant shore, the low, guttural voices of others, the occasional cheer or shout from the unseen watchers, and then Diddy's voice, chillingly clear, closer than the rest, cutting through the haze. Saying something like, that's how we break them in, a casual instruction, a horrifying statement of purpose, and then I heard my name. They were saying my name, while doing things I don't even want to repeat in this courtroom, things my mind, in its mercy, had blacked out. It wasn't just humiliating, it was horrifying. It was a violation of his deepest self, a defilement that went beyond mere embarrassment. There's a fundamental difference between being embarrassed by a mistake and being stripped of your humanity. That tape, it took something from me, something irreplaceable, my sense of safety, my control over my own body, my own mind. I never consented to being recorded. I never agreed to be a part of that. But Diddy recorded it. He kept it. Maybe to use, maybe just to have. A trophy. A leash. He explained how for years he couldn't figure out why he would feel sudden, inexplicable anxiety when certain names were mentioned, why he had random crippling panic attacks during simple interviews, why he would wake up in a cold sweat from nightmares he couldn't recall. Now I know. It's because I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was remembering something my mind, in its protective instinct, didn't want me to remember. Will said that hearing the audio, confronting the undeniable proof, forced him to face everything. The years of manipulation, the subtle grooming, the gut-wrenching betrayal from people who stood by and watched, who were complicit. And what shook him most wasn't just what he heard. It was what I didn't remember, the void, the missing time, the parts of that night that remain utterly blank, filled only by the chilling implications of that tape. If you want to know how powerful Diddy is, if you want to understand the depth of his control, ask yourself how someone like me, with all my resources, all my fame, all my perceived strength, could be silenced for 20 years and not even realize how deeply I was enslaved. By the time Will Smith's testimony hit the media, a few hours after its initial delivery in the courtroom, it was too late for Hollywood's well-oiled damage control machinery to even begin its work. The initial clips from court, recorded by reporters and quickly transcribed, were viral before the bailiff could even call for a reset. Hashtags exploded across every platform, replacing the usual celebrity gossip with raw outrage. Number Will speaks, number Diddy tape, number the Diddy files, number no more silence. And for the first time in his celebrated career, the public saw Will Smith not as a polished A-lister, a flawless performer, but as something far more profound, a survivor, a broken man, finally speaking his truth. I knew once I spoke, things would get ugly. I expected it, but I didn't know how fast, how immediate the backlash would be. He recounted the brutal speed of the consequences. Within 24 hours of his testimony, he lost 2 pending brand endorsements, multi-million-dollar deals that had been signed, sealed, and delivered. Another major studio halted promotion for a highly anticipated film he had already shot, a project years in the making. But the surprising truth, he said, was that it didn't matter. Because I'd already lost something far more valuable years ago, my voice, my autonomy, my peace of mind, what more could they take? Yet amidst the immediate professional fallout, another kind of communication began. The calls started rolling in, quiet ones, texts from actors, producers, even directors he barely knew, reaching out in the dead of night, some of them thanking him, expressing a quiet admiration for his courage, others warning him. One text read, "You don't know who you just declared war on. Be careful." Another simply stated, "You've made yourself radioactive." Will mentioned a few names during a later sealed portion of the testimony, without full detail, citing legal reasons, but nodded when the prosecution asked about the complicity of people like Kevin Hart, Meek Mill, who had himself made allegations, and even Lucien Grange, a titan of the music industry. This isn't just a Diddy problem. This isn't one bad apple. It's an industry built on silence, on compromise, on fear, and everyone's been trading in that currency. It's a systemic rot that goes deeper than anyone wants to admit. He also expressed a chilling belief that others held dirt on him. I know after this, more footage might come out. They'll dig. They'll try to paint me as unstable, as broken, as a liar. Let them. I'm not here to protect myself anymore. I'm here to protect the truth. And if my truth exposes others, so be it. He told the court he expected backlash, expected denials, and expected Diddy's formidable legal team to claim he was making it all up, that he was bitter, that he was covering something. They'll say I'm desperate, they'll say I'm lying, but I ask you this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if I was lying, why did I wait this long? Why now, when I have more to lose than ever before? Why now, when I could have stayed comfortably silent in my mansion, shielded by my fame? Sometimes the truth comes late. It takes years to surface, but when it does, it still hits like thunder. For his final statement, a rare and dramatic allowance by the judge, Will Smith was permitted to speak directly to Diddy. He rose from the witness chair, his body radiating a quiet intensity, and walked a few feet closer to the defense table. He stopped, stood tall, and locked eyes with the man who had been a silent tormentor for decades. You built an empire out of manipulation. You called it success. You called it culture. You called it love. You dressed it up in diamonds and private jets. But all you built, Sean Combs, was fear. An empire of fear. Diddy remained utterly motionless, a waxen figure, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear, tugging at his sleeve. Will didn't blink. His gaze was unwavering, unflinching. I saw what you did to those girls. I saw what you did to me. I heard the things you said about me, about others, when you thought I wasn't listening, when you thought no one was listening. You broke people. You enjoyed it. You broke them for sport. Then with a deliberate, almost theatrical movement, Will pulled something from his pocket, an old crinkled photograph, its edges soft with age. This was me in 2004, right before that first party, right before my life changed. That's the man I used to be. I haven't seen him in years. If you think this is just about Cassie, or me, or one terrible night in some mansion, you're not seeing the whole picture. This is about a network of power, unseen but pervasive, designed to silence truth, designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. And if we don't tear it down, if we don't expose it now, it will keep going. It will find new victims. It will continue its reign of terror. Then he faced Diddy, one last time, his voice, a final, cutting, unyielding blow, delivered with the full force of 2 decades of suppressed rage and pain. You once said, "Nobody parties like Diddy." Well, nobody lies like you either. Diddy sat there, utterly motionless, utterly defeated. His lawyer, still whispering, seemed to shrink beside him, because for the first time in decades, Sean Combs wasn't the one controlling the room. The narrative had been ripped from his grasp. When Will Smith stepped down from that witness stand, he didn't look like a man who had won anything in the conventional sense. He looked like someone who had finally stopped running. The courtroom was left in a profound stillness, almost unsure how to breathe again, as if the very air had been purged. Even the stern, experienced judge looked shaken, his gavel unused, his face etched with the weight of the testimony. Some of the jurors had tears in their eyes, openly weeping, their faces reflecting the raw emotion of Will's words. And Diddy, for the first time in the entire prolonged trial, looked utterly, terrifyingly empty. A shell of the man who had projected such arrogance. He had nothing left to say. Will didn't speak to the press when he exited the courthouse. He didn't wave, didn't posture for the cameras. He simply walked out the front doors, a solitary figure against the blinding flash of 1,000 lenses, his head held high, but his shoulders visibly carrying the crushing weight of 20 years of trauma. When asked later by a particularly persistent reporter if he felt relieved, he reportedly responded, his voice hoarse, "Relief isn't the right word, it's just finished." A profound, quiet completion, not a victory. But outside the courtroom, the world was only beginning to react. Hollywood, that glittering self-protective machine, went into a quiet, desperate panic. Executives canceled meetings abruptly. Talent agencies paused deals, sending cryptic internal memos. Directors and producers who had once celebrated Will Smith, who had courted his involvement in their biggest projects, suddenly found their phones ringing off the hook with uncomfortable questions from investors and concerned board members. The same people who had once publicly proclaimed him family were now issuing boilerplate statements of deep concern and unwavering commitment to truth and accountability, their words hollow and transparent. Behind closed doors, crisis teams were activated with a frantic urgency. PR firms sent internal memos, terse and unyielding, urging clients to publicly distance themselves from any past associations with Mr. Combs, instructing them to scrub social media of old party photos, to delete any casual mentions. And while many tried to pretend they were shocked, feigning surprise and disgust, the Internet, that tireless archivist of inconvenient truths, was already doing what it does best, resurfacing the receipts. Old clips of Diddy brushing shoulders with top-tier names across music, film, and fashion. Parties where everyone looked too uncomfortable, too guarded, to be merely enjoying themselves. Interviews where celebrity guests danced around uncomfortable questions about Diddy, their smiles strained, their eyes darting nervously. Footage of Will Smith from years, visibly recoiling, his face betraying a flicker of unease, when Diddy's name came up in conversation. And most painfully, dozens of clips from the beloved Fresh Prince era, where fans now watched with new, horrified eyes, convinced that Will, even then, looked like he was smiling through something unspeakable. Fans weren't just shocked. They were furious that someone like Will Smith, a figure of such public adoration and trust, had to carry this burden alone for so long. Furious that for years the whispers and rumors about Diddy's darker side were dismissed as baseless conspiracy theories, as petty jealousy. And furious that the system, the very fabric of the industry, had stayed quiet for so long, protecting the powerful at the expense of its own. But Will Smith didn't stay in hiding. He didn't retreat into the shadows of his trauma. The day after his testimony, a single message appeared on his social media, quiet yet immensely powerful. It was a black and white photo of himself as a young actor in 1993. Standing on a film set, his face open and innocent, smiling into the warm sun, blissfully unaware of the darkness that lay ahead. The caption read, simply, "He didn't know what was coming, but he made it through. I'm proud of him." No hashtags, no name drops, no elaborate explanation, just that. The response was immediate, overwhelming. Millions of shares, tens of thousands of comments flooding in, not just from celebrities and activists, but from everyday people thanking him for his courage. More than anything, survivors of abuse, men especially, flooded the post with their own confessions, their own stories, their own painful realizations. "You gave us a voice," one wrote, echoing the sentiments of countless others. "If Will can speak, so can we." It became a rallying cry, a wave of long-suppressed truth beginning to break. Meanwhile, back inside the court, Diddy's legal team scrambled, their faces grim, their strategies in disarray. Rumors swirled like a fever in the air that more subpoenas were going out, not just to musicians and assistants, but to high-level executives at major labels, distribution companies, even media conglomerates that had long turned a blind eye. What Will's testimony had done wasn't just personal. It had cracked the dam of silence. And now the flood was coming, threatening to drown an entire industry in its wake. Whispers began to circulate about the existence of even more tapes. Not just audio, but visual footage, some of them allegedly featuring other equally prominent public figures. The court had sealed these for now, their contents deemed too explosive, too potentially damaging to the ongoing investigation. But according to insiders, if any of them were to leak, it would flip the entire entertainment industry upside down, exposing a web of depravity and complicity far wider than anyone had ever imagined. And Will. He didn't return to work right away. He declined interviews, canceled appearances, but he wasn't hiding. Insiders say he's been spending time with his kids, focused on rebuilding what truly matters, rediscovering a piece he hadn't known in decades. One friend told Variety anonymously, "He's healing now, for the first time in years. He's not pretending anymore." Before court adjourned that day, the judge made a final powerful statement that caught even the jaded media off guard, a rare moment of judicial emotion. What we heard today was not just testimony, it was a reckoning, and this court acknowledges the extraordinary courage it took to deliver it. The final shot of the day wasn't of Diddy, lost in his defeat. It wasn't even of Will, walking towards his uncertain future. It was of the jury, sitting motionless, their faces solemn, processing everything they'd just heard, the weight of the truth settling upon them. And in that profound, echoing silence, one thing was irrevocably clear. The era of silence was over. The game had changed, and the industry would never be the same.